Next up, we have a panel with Q&A, so that'll be a lot of fun. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, Vice President of Battery Finance, Sam Callahan. Please also welcome to the stage your panelists, Eric Semler, Chairman of Semler Scientific, Alexander Laizet, Deputy CEO and Director of Bitcoin Strategy at the Blockchain Group, and Yves Choueifaty with Tobam.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Eric, Alex, Yves. I'm very excited to be here. I remember when Strategy came on the scene and announced their purchase. They were the first public company. And I was like, who are these guys? And it was $250 million. And I was like, okay. And then Michael Saylor tweeted for the first time, really, to the Bitcoin community. And he said, Bitcoin is a swarm of cyber hornets exponentially growing stronger and faster behind a wall of encrypted energy. And I was like, this guy's going to fit right in. And little did I know that he became a pioneer in corporate treasury strategy, and he's now one of the top performing equities in the world since that adoption, and it's been followed with Alex and Eric, and Yves has been a huge part of that as well. And I wanted to go to Yves first because you actually ran the numbers and kind of figured out why has strategy outperformed? What has driven that outperformance? And I thought that would help us kind of start off this conversation, and then we can get into why it's actually working for these companies as well.
In fact, it's pretty easy. It's very mathematical. Now we have published a paper about that in March of this year. It's a paper we wrote about 2 years ago, but we did not publish it until we saw an increase of urban legends around the MicroStrategy. Everybody was saying it's a leverage bet. And in fact, we realized that there is almost no debt in MicroStrategy, and that the performance of MicroStrategy can be completely analyzed into 3 terms. One of them is extremely famous. It's a Bitcoin yield, and the Bitcoin yield cannot be negative in a way. The second one is what gives MicroStrategy its exposure to Bitcoin. But the thing that is very important, it is that this second term is completely exponential. It's beta times 1 plus the Bitcoin yield times the return of the Bitcoin. And then there is a term which is the only one which is really Gaussian. It's a term that is related to the premium. In fact, we are going to publish an article probably in the next few weeks, an article that really analyzes the risk of MicroStrategy and shows the incredible convexity of Bitcoin treasury company stocks. It's a behavior which is completely convex, which is going to give you an increased exposure when the Bitcoin performs well, and which exposure goes down when the Bitcoin goes down. And all of that is very simple math, and I really believe that not owning those stocks, if you have a long-term investment vehicle, simply doesn't make sense.
So Bitcoin yield plus Bitcoin exposure could be very powerful. Alex, over the last year, over 1,100% BTC yield. Pretty incredible. And so maybe explain how you've accelerated that so effectively and how you intend to maintain that.
Yeah, I think the very powerful conclusion of the mathematical paper of Yves and Tobam is effectively that if you are bullish on Bitcoin, the best risk-adjusted way to get an outperformance of Bitcoin is Bitcoin treasury companies. And so if you are bullish on Bitcoin, you should be bullish on Bitcoin treasury companies. And then the second conclusion is that if you are bullish on Bitcoin treasury companies, well, potentially you may want to have a look at early stage Bitcoin treasury companies. And they provide, of course, a complementary risk return profile to the other Bitcoin treasury companies. And so it's not one or the other, it's more a question of allocation and risk management and potential outperformance of Bitcoin. And so at the Blockchain Group, we launched a strategy back in November 2024. And since then, we've generated more than 3,000% performance. and we've been the #1 stock performer in France, in Europe, and very similar to Metaplanet performance. And how did we generate that? Well, we decided to put the ego aside and adopt the playbook that works, same as Semler, and to adopt the strategy playbook to raise as much capital as possible, as fast as possible, to accumulate the most Bitcoin as fast as possible, but in the most accretive way as possible. And so how do you do that? Well, you focus 121% every day on increasing the Bitcoin per share over time, the BTC yield. And so to give you an example, the operation we did in March of 2025, we increased the number of Bitcoin on the balance sheet by 15x, while we increased the number of shares to be issued by 2x. And that's how you get a 700+% BTC yield. And in that way, we raised 50 million euros in 5 months. And then in 2 months, we accelerated and we raised 100 million euros more. And so in June 10, we asked for the permission to raise for 10 billion euros more because there is no limit to this. As soon as you want to increase the Bitcoin per share, that is your intention and that is what you focus on, and that is where you can have the most results in the market.
We'll get into how you raise some of that capital for sure. I want to turn to Eric because after Michael Saylor announced that he would put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, everybody was waiting for the next company to do it. I think it took a lot longer than people thought. But then finally, you come in and you show a ton of conviction and really came in, dove in, and really started to expand. What have you learned, and why did you finally come in and say, we're going to copy Michael Saylor as well?
Thanks, Sam. Can you hear me? You know, it shocked me that it took so long for someone to follow in his footsteps, and I'm still kind of scratching my head as to why it took so long. It was difficult at first. I kind of experienced why it took so long. The SEC was incredibly a painful process for us to kind of get our ATM going and all those things. So it was clear that it was not the easiest process to pursue, and probably others had anticipated that with the type of government we had in the U.S. at the time. But I actually, it was kind of the last resort. You know, we were a company with almost half of our market cap was in cash at the time, and we looked for acquisitions. We assumed we'd find an acquisition that would, you know, help us reignite our growth. And we just looked and looked. It was kind of like, you know, you tried everything. You looked under every rock, you know, for an opportunity. Buying back stock didn't make sense. Our stock was too thinly traded, and weren't really sure what we were buying it for. And so it was just kind of this, you know, I guess you could call it an epiphany, you know, where I'm just studying MicroStrategy. I owned the stock. I was very interested in what Michael Saylor was doing. Didn't fully appreciate the playbook. You know, I just thought it was cool that he had Bitcoin on his balance sheet. And just, I think, you know, I hit that button, like on one of those music video shows when you hear the singer, you're like, he's talking to me. It's resonating. He is saying, he's talking about these zombie companies. He was a zombie company. That's what we are. We're a zombie company. We almost look exactly like he did in August 2020. And I just like, we got to go do this. And I went to our board. They didn't know anything about MicroStrategy. I had to educate them and teach them about it. And it didn't take that much effort. They really got it. And we've just been so excited, you know, to be in this group. And, you know, we're really, really, really fired up for what's ahead for us. And, you know, thank God we did it, because our core business has struggled, and it's really saved us.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back to the core business. I want to welcome to the stage Adam Back. I don't think he needs any introduction, but I'll throw it to you, Adam, because you've been an investor in a lot of these companies. And I think what's interesting is the structure that you've chosen to invest in with these Bitcoin-backed, Bitcoin-denominated convertibles. And so maybe talk about why you like that structure as an investor, and then what you look for in a treasury company when you're considering investing.
Yeah, I was a fairly early investor in MicroStrategy once he announced the Bitcoin strategy, because I thought he was doing something very interesting to encourage public market companies to use Bitcoin as an inflation hedge for their treasuries. So I wanted to, in a small way support him. I thought if lots of Bitcoiners supported him and bought the shares, that would ultimately help his mission. And so then in terms of the structure, I tended to invest in companies where I knew the management team or got to know them. And so that there was some kind of element of trust that they understood Bitcoin. They're in it for an interesting, positive reason. And so the Bitcoin basis convertible note, I think, is a very clever instrument because it doesn't really have a debt ratio aspect to it. So I'd seen with MicroStrategy in their first bear market, and I was investing through this, that as the price fell, Michael Saylor was sort of daring the market. He would just buy more, and he would take another $1 billion or something, and it was debt. So there's a lot of corporate debt, and then he took a Bitcoin collateralized loan from Silvergate, and then that was in the news. He's going to get margin called, but people didn't understand that margin call just means you give them more Bitcoin. He had lots of margin, right? But at the end of the day, at the bottom of the market, he was actually had a higher debt than the Bitcoin NAV for 5 months in a row, which is not a healthy position. Now, he kept paying the interest and had the cushion of the enterprise value. So, you can see now that MicroStrategy is always learning and adapting. And so they're sort of inventing instruments and ways to participate with Bitcoin. It's very cool to observe. And everybody else is able to build on that and use things and learn the lessons as well. So now MicroStrategy is very conservative, 15% debt ratio. They target no more than 30. They've got the tools needed to address to adapt it, right? Do more ATMs to reduce the debt ratio. And so the blockchain group, actually with these Bitcoin convertible notes, it means that there isn't really a liquidation risk at all. They notionally, the example Alexandre gave where they bought in 14 times more and 7 times increase in Bitcoin per share, if you did that with a euro debt, it would be an enormous leverage ratio, like a degenerate leverage long trader on an exchange kind of thing. But actually, it's completely safe because the debt is Bitcoin. Is a Bitcoin denominated debt, and they have the Bitcoin. So if there was a situation that required it, they could just give the Bitcoin back. So I think it enables them to run much hotter and simultaneously much more safely than the fiat-based convertible debt structures. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and Alex, maybe you can touch on, from your perspective, being the CEO, deputy CEO of a treasury company, how do you like this structure and why?
Yeah, so we were back in December 2024 with 40 Bitcoin on the balance sheet and the ambition to raise as a leading Bitcoin treasury company. And we looked at different ways as to how to increase that number of Bitcoin very aggressively, but in a risk minimized way. And so we structured an SPV in Luxembourg that is bankruptcy remote, but 100% owned by the blockchain group. And in this way, we can provide the investors with a downside protection of Bitcoin over 5 years, which if you believe in Bitcoin, the risk is extremely low to give back Bitcoin over 5 years. That would mean that Bitcoin would have performed less than the fiat devaluation that happens every year, which is extremely not probable, but there is always a risk. Still, it's a risk that we accept because we believe in Bitcoin. So if you don't believe in Bitcoin, you would not first take a look at Bitcoin treasury companies. So we believe in Bitcoin, and we see that 5 years time horizon protects you from a downside of a bear market. And so that's a best risk-adjusted way to give both the investor the downside protection of if the company fails, basically, then the investor can get back Bitcoin. If we succeed, then everyone can convert and have the share basically outperform the Bitcoin because we are Bitcoin on the balance sheet plus Bitcoin yield. And so to simplify basically what we are doing, and the shareholder just told us yesterday that he orange pilled 14 people in his environment by saying this very simple thing, that basically a Bitcoin treasury company is working every day to buy its shareholders more Bitcoin at lower prices. And that is done through the usage of high premiums, but the velocity of covering that premium into net asset value. And then when you reach the equivalent of the premium that you had at the beginning, but in net asset value, then everything that the company does is more BTC yield every day. And so every day we generate 1.5% BTC yield on a daily basis. Can you imagine that for traditional asset management? That is not seen anywhere. Like when I was working with corporate finance treasurers in France, it was negative interest rates at the time with monetary funds in 2020. And so now you have 1.5% BTC yield on a daily basis. That is not seen before in the markets. And so the BTC convertible note is basically providing a major arbitrage opportunities for investors around the world, and it allows us to provide Bitcoin Treasury as a service. We are becoming the balance sheet for any type of P&L in the world that want to gain exposure to a Bitcoin Treasury company. And we do that in a risk minimized way by taking no leverage. It's purely BTC denominated. There is no fiat in the process. And so in this way, we can really scale ad infinitum the number of Bitcoin that we can add to the balance sheet at the same time that we have also an ATM type structure together with Tobam that allows us also to have regular purchases and to transform in a more regular basis the premium that we can generate.
Yeah, I was just going to add that to your question, the experience, you're actually able to invest using Bitcoin. So the process was you send Bitcoin with their custodian, Bitcoin Suisse, which is underneath the Luxembourg structure. Yeah, and so effectively, that's interesting for some countries because you have made an in-kind investment, so you haven't sold lower basis cost Bitcoin, triggering a capital gains drag on your way in and on your way out. So I mean, maybe you have one on the way out, but there's something to say about that as well.
Definitely. And removing that fiat risk is huge. Yves, you've been in this space for so long, you know, your firm. you saw, yeah, Adam as well, obviously. But Yves, you saw MicroStrategy, you immediately understood it. You were a very early investor there. And now you're doing this great work with the blockchain group. And you guys just recently announced this ATM-like structure. And I think that's one of the things that are making Bitcoin Treasury companies perform so well is how innovative they're getting in terms of their capital market strategies. And so can you just explain what that ATM-like structure is and why you guys decided to do that?
I would like to add something before. You mentioned that it took a lot of time for people to, copy MicroStrategy. I really believe that the game changer was the launch of the BlackRock ETF. In fact, the purpose of MicroStrategy before the ETF was to gain an exposure to Bitcoin only. And when the ETF was launched, the purpose of MicroStrategy had to change. And it's only after the ETF was launched that it became obvious that passively owning Bitcoin for MicroStrategy did not make sense anymore. So he had to come up with something else. And he had this incredibly simple and beautiful idea to convert his premium into Bitcoin yield. And really, I think the game changer and then the explanation for that very long time period before a second player was in fact the launch of the ETF. On the ATM question, what we have done in fact is incredibly useful for both parties to make things clear. The idea is really to raise capital every single day. And the financial engineering that we have organized was extremely well coordinated with a French regulator. And I think that, if I may say so, the three parties, the blockchain group, Tobam, and the French regulator, organized a machine which is incredibly efficient over the long term. So I don't know how much you want to talk about it, Alexandre, but it's really something that benefits incredibly well Tobam funds and organizes a very smooth way to increase their capital in a systematic fashion for the blockchain group. It's early days, so I don't want to give figures today, and because it's only been 2 weeks, roughly. So, but the first 2 weeks are incredibly encouraging, and we have really leveraged in a way the conduits increase of capital of ALTBG.
If I may add, the very difference between traditional ATM in the US and what we have put together was quite inspired from what works a lot with Metaplanet, meaning that it's a form of a long-only type ATM where basically you can only sell shares when the shares are in strength. So basically, Tobam can really access the price of the day before, either the closing price of the day before or the volume-weighted average price of the day before, the higher of both. And so effectively, it's a form of ATM where the interests are aligned within common shareholders, the company, and the asset manager. And in this way, you don't punish the price, and the volumes are limited to 21% of the day before. Of course, 21% is derived from a very savvy formula that you all know. And so 21% allows also to let the stock run and the premium run, while at the same time monetizing efficiently every day, potentially, as Yves mentioned, the premium into the net asset value and increase further the time to cover the premium that we're able to cover into 4 to 5 months currently. Yeah.
It's very cool. I'm kind of geek out on that kind of stuff. But Eric, you had the ATM available in the United States, and you've used it to now stack, is it 4,400? Over 4,400?
Yeah, about $500 million.
$500 million worth of Bitcoin. You just made some news today. You put out a plan.
Yep.
10,000 by the end of 2025, 105,000 by the end of 2027.
Yep.
Some lofty goals. I was wondering, what are some tools that you're thinking about how to acquire those? And then also you announced the hiring of Joe Burnett, somebody who I'm a big fan of as your director of Bitcoin strategy. So how important is the team as well in terms of executing to meet these goals?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. We're looking at new markets that we haven't gotten into yet, like the preferred market. I think that is a very promising area for us. But we'll always survey what's available, and there's a lot of demand right now for our ATM. We have been lightly pressing it at these levels. We'd rather see the stock higher to use it. But I would say that hiring Joe was really important. As I've been in this now, I guess a year, I'm one of the older veterans of this. It's come clear to me that you really do need a lot of depth in your team, and I really have a lot of admiration for what Strategy has built. Their infrastructure, knowing their treasury team really well, and wanting to have that strength and the kind of this intellectual firepower as well as just kind of a lot of hands on deck, because there's so many options. There's so many ways to go about doing this. And I also think that with the proliferation of all these Bitcoin treasury companies, there's going to be consolidation, and eventually you're going to see there's going to be a point where some of them need a lifeline. They become zombie treasury companies, and so there might be opportunities like that. And so I'd like to have kind of all the resources available to do that. Joe's a superpower. He has a huge following and is a real expert on the whole MicroStrategy and our strategy playbook. I've spent a lot of time with him, so I think he's going to add a lot of value.
Yeah, I think so too. Obviously a fan of your newest member of the board as well. So congratulations on that.
She's fantastic.
I guess that leads to my next question, which is, as more of these treasury companies come to the market, what's going to separate a good treasury company from a great one? And I'll kind of throw this out to the panel, whoever wants to jump on it, and maybe we can just discuss how you guys think, what's going to separate the wheat from the chaff.
I mean, my impression is it's to do with execution. So you've heard Alexander express it. You've got to be trying to strategize how to buy Bitcoin every day. And for your, for the audience who are considering buying the stocks, they don't see the work that goes behind it, right? They see the announcements, and they like to see announcements frequently. So Eric put out an announcement. The blockchain group is putting out sort of compound announcements with different types of raise, some private placement from a French fund, the ATM with Tobam, another convertible note, also Tobam, right? So different announcements on a fast pace, but what the audience doesn't see is that maybe you took 2 weeks of legal work to make one of those things happen, or you need a regulator approval for the other thing. So behind the scenes, clearly there's got to be a team with a lot of expertise in public markets and a lot of drive to keep the fast pace. So I think my impression is that's what it takes. If somebody is a bit slower, they probably won't capture as well the metrics. And there's probably going to be people who are skipping between the treasury companies. You see people say, "Oh, I sold some MicroStrategy, it's going too slow. I bought some OPG, or I bought some H100, or I bought Semler because I think the MNAV is attractive now." And that, you see people moving around now as well. So I think the market forces will kind of tell us what people like as well. So that'll be interesting to see.
I believe that if you look at it from a quantitative point of view, you need to have two conditions met. The first one is, very paradoxically speaking, you will need a high MNAV. You want a high MNAV. The second thing it is that you need an ability to raise capital in proportion to your market cap. And when those two conditions are met, this is why, in fact, I believe that the strength of the cap table is very important. At the birth of the Bitcoin Treasury company, you need to have some, I don't know how to call it, mentors around the child that are possibly extremely able to support the growth of the capital. It's very important, I believe, to understand that the Bitcoin Treasury company, which is successful, is in fact an alliance of people that could support the growth of capital in the early months and years of the growth of the company. So you need a market which has depth, a retail market that has depth, and you need around the treasury company to have mentors, to have sponsors that could, in fact, during a few months, a few years, could continue to support the capital raising.
I kind of differ from that. I think there's going to be a lot of different flavors of this. I don't think it's as straightforward as copying strategy. I think that's a great place to start, and it's a fantastic playbook that Michael has laid out, and I'm biggest fan in the world of his. But I do think there will be other types of strategies that will work, and I think it is all about execution, but there will be companies that have healthy core businesses that will fuel operating cash flow purchases of Bitcoin, which are the best. That's the single best way to buy Bitcoin, in my mind, is using your operating cash flow. And I think that we all can't be foolish enough to think that Bitcoin won't go through another bear market, right? So you need a buffer. You will need other sources of cash flow during that time, or you will need to be very underlevered to be able to capture the opportunity to buy Bitcoin at lower prices. So there will be companies who are better positioned for that when that comes than others who are maybe kind of too strictly focused on having just strictly Bitcoin as their strategy and not having a core business. So I think there's also other great strategies in terms of acquiring other companies with cash flow to increase your operating cash flow. I think that's underrated.
One more thing I want to add is we haven't seen it yet because of the range of market conditions we've seen. MicroStrategy has been around a bit longer, so they experienced a bear market, and I think you can see in their current debt ratio plans and the way they balance ATMs to delever by increasing the number of shares and taking on convertibles with soft calls so that they can call them, hopefully. They can contain their debt ratio, but I think the interesting question, eventually there'll be a bear market, is can somebody use some financial engineering to be able to very effectively keep a high pace of Bitcoin yield through the bear market? If there's a way to unlock that, I think that's really interesting. Now, of course, it has to be partly the investor education, because if a Bitcoin price is on a downwards trajectory, and historically his big corrections, right? Ultimately, for a Bitcoin basis investor, you shouldn't care about the price. You should care about the number of Bitcoin per share. So if what I've been doing in trading the company is actually price the shares in Bitcoin. Use like 1,000 MicroStrategy shares divided by the price of Bitcoin, and that's, you know, it's above 1, so it's an easy number to work with, and that's the punchline, right? So then, you know, if people are just looking at the euro or the Swedish krona or the dollar price of the share and it's going down, and then they don't want to invest in anything, that's hard to generate enthusiasm for. But if people could look at it from the perspective of the price in Bitcoin, that could be completely stationary. And then if it's still able to accumulate Bitcoin per share, for example, maybe there's a variant of the Bitcoin convertible note that can still accrete in a bear market, right? Because one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin ultimately, right? So that's, I'm curious to see how the Treasury companies explore the mechanisms, the financial engineering mechanisms as the market evolves.
Yeah, I think actually the two questions are related, like the team and what happens in a bear market, and how you can adapt, and what is the focus you can have as a treasury company. Since the very beginning at the Blockchain Group, we are a team of financial engineers and capital markets professionals. And actually, we believe that is the core area where we can focus and really execute faster, more accretively, and accelerate at a pace that exceeds our own past pace. And that's where I think that's extremely, and that's where I agree with you as well, Eric, is it's not a competition. Like you have thousands of companies that will add Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and as you said, there will be new flavors and there will be new types of strategies and so on. We just believe that the most accretive strategy for us is to maximize BTC yield in a bull market, in a bear market, in a context where you have thousands of more companies or less companies. It doesn't really matter. We will adapt at each market context and provide the financial instrument that will meet the investor demand at the time of the market where it makes sense. And if it's a BTC denominated note like we have right now, or if it's a new type of financial instrument, we'll issue the financial instrument that's adapted for the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, and that's enabling us to generate the most BTC yield. And that's the core focus, and that's the strategy we will double down in the bear market, and we will just focus on this. Because you can you said, how do you distinguish between Bitcoin treasuries over the world? Well, the good example, and congrats on hiring Joe. I think he's a great hire, and he will do an amazing job. And I think he should just take all of the companies publicly traded in the world, and you say, okay, I will apply one criteria. Is there a director of Bitcoin strategy? Okay, then you eliminate 95% of companies, because that shows you the type of focus that there is at the core of the company to focus on maximizing BTC yield. And so that's great news, and congrats. And so I think that where you do that, you get like 5 companies in the world. And so that's the first aspect. And when you can focus as an investor on 5 companies, then you have a great edge, I think. And then out of these companies, I think you have a lot of winning aspects to it. And you have different markets, different financial instruments. And I think that strategy is showing the way, as you mentioned, in terms of what are the new type of financial instruments that a Bitcoin treasury company can offer to have a very long-term view, irrespective of a bull or bear market. And I think the preferreds are very interesting. And so investors can exchange between basically the common stock, between the convertible note, between the 10% yield or the 8% yield, and different type of aspects that you want for different type of exposures. And in a more future state, at some point, Bitcoin treasury company will be the cornerstone of capital markets. The first and largest Bitcoin treasury companies will be the most valuable companies on earth, because Bitcoin is being adopted as the core standard of value in the world. And at this point of time, basically Bitcoin treasury companies will be providing different type of financial instruments to the different type of asset managers, non-listed companies, individuals, and that will provide a new type of financial markets. At some point, with the great work of the Liquid network, and that Blockstream has been contributing a lot, you will have these financial instruments on a tokenized way on top of Bitcoin, and you will have the ability to just transfer those type of assets between each other in type of bull market, bear market, and you will have more optionality, and that's where, at the end of the day, the more Bitcoin treasuries, the more capital you can raise because you have more investors educated around the world, and the more BTC yield you can provide to your shareholders.
I'm very excited to see these treasury companies beyond strategy in the bear market, because as you mentioned, it's going to get very creative in terms of preferreds, Bitcoin convertibles, having an operating company that generates cash to have that counter-cyclical BTC yield growth is going to be really paramount. But let's say, so one thing that I love about these treasury companies is how transparent they are. It's like the ethos of Bitcoin about their goals. I think it's very important for the execution of the strategy. I mean, I mentioned your announcement today, but let's say you guys reach all those goals. Let's zoom out 5 to 10 years. You kind of hinted at some of this, but what do you see for your companies moving forward? And where do you start to pivot between, I'm accumulating Bitcoin, I'm going to keep doing that, but also from a capital efficiency standpoint, what do we do with the Bitcoin from there? I think that's a question that's always on people's minds. So maybe I'll throw it to Eric and then just go down the line.
Yeah, I think there is this kind of utopia you're kind of describing where we own all this incredible digital real estate. And how do we leverage that, right? There's a lot to think about. It's kind of like it feels like nirvana almost in a sense, because I'm sure there will be, you'll kind of be in the position of a bank or a huge owner of real estate, and you kind of rent it out, you maximize the yield of it. I think you become almost like a lender of last resort. And I think that's probably where we're headed. So as we accumulate Bitcoin, and why I think it's really important, in particular, 2 reasons really why I think it's important to have a lot of scale, like having $500 million and telling people we're going to get to 10 billion or whatever, then we hope to get as even beyond that. It's because we want to own as many cities as we can in the digital world, and getting that kind of footprint early on, and we're in a good spot where we can really be a leader. We're the 4th largest U.S. Bitcoin treasury company, and we want to be number 1, and we think we can do that, and we said that to the market yesterday. The other thing that's really important, I don't know how much it applies to the to European markets, but in the U.S., there's really only one company that fund managers can own. To get exposure to Bitcoin. They can't own Bitcoin, they can't own the ETFs, they can own strategy, and that's basically it if you're a large fund manager. And a lot of those guys are my close friends. I've been, colleagues of theirs as a hedge fund manager for 25, 30 years. I know them all well, and I know they're starving for public equities to own to get exposure to Bitcoin, and they can't make strategy a 20% position in their portfolio. So we want to be one of those companies. We want to be a public equity, a scarce asset that deserves a premium to Bitcoin for just that very reason. And I think there will be others besides strategy. We're starting to see some of them come out of the woodwork, but it's going to be hard to get to that kind of 10 billion, 15, $20 billion market cap to qualify to be in those funds. And I have my eye on that target.
As you may know, we have published our goals for the next 4 to 8 years, and we target 1% of the total BTC supply as our BTC stack, so about 210K Bitcoin by 2033. So if Bitcoin reaches 1 million, 2 million euros or dollars, that would mean that we would be at 200, 400 billion valuation in the market, just considering the net asset value. So if you add to that the potential premiums at the time, then you can get something quite explosive. And potentially the most valuable company in Europe. So the potential is enormous, and of course it's a high ambition, and we need to work very hard on this objective. But what I would like to really emphasize, and because I'm seeing a lot of new reactions, like over the last 2 to 3 months, you see the overall crypto complex completely capitulating to Bitcoin. And that's, of course, great news. We welcome them. But sometimes I see that there is a very short-term perspective on Bitcoin treasury companies. And I see comments like, the stock does minus 5%, and I receive messages, what's happening, and so on. Like, okay, do you know Bitcoin? Or it's like, Bitcoin does minus 5 or minus 10, or could even do minus 20 or 30%. You need to be prepared. It is not a short-term investment. We are building solid foundations for the future. As you said, like it's like cities for the future. So you need to build a solid foundations. That's why since the very beginning, and when I was back in December and thinking about the BTC convertible note, we're thinking how to make this as solid as possible for the future. And so that's a long-term view. And for Bitcoin, as Michael says as well, like the minimum time horizon should be 4 years to think about it. And the best time horizon is forever. So when you look at a Bitcoin treasury company, you should really look at it like a long-term arbitrage play to get more Bitcoin, but not as a short-term gain potential. So we focus on maximizing as soon as possible the BTC yield and maximizing, of course, the performance for shareholders. But you should have a long-term view, and I think that's the appropriate manner.
Yeah. Woo. Let's just let's get Yves and Adam's just real quick your closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah. So I think one interesting question here is. So I was asked by some friends in banking what, a little bit skeptical, but how scalable is it? Which means, if you get more and more companies, will they start to erode the effect of the treasury company? And after not many seconds thought, I said, no, it's an enormous arbitrage. It's basically an arbitrage between the fiat current world and a 200, 300 trillion hyper-Bitcoinized future, right? So from that point of view, this strategy can absorb, and not just from treasury companies, but individuals and via ETFs or directly, just all of people converting wealth and savings into Bitcoin is such an enormous arbitrage that, if Berkshire Hathaway under new management decide to spend all of their cash reserves, it's no problem. There's lots of space. There's $200 trillion worth of space, right? So it's very scalable. So that was my answer for that one.
Okay. On the long term, I really believe that the future of currency will not be Bitcoin. I think that the future of currency, the future of Bitcoin is to be the standard way to measure value. And in fact, I really believe that the future of currency are going to be tokens that the Bitcoin treasury companies are going to issue. The model of Michael Saylor is a very old model. In 1694, a group of businessmen in London gathered, and they have created a company, and the only goal of this company was to raise capital and buy gold. And they decided to call this company the Bank of England. And the same happened in 1800 in France, when Napoleon took the 100 wealthiest families in France and told them, you need to launch the Banque de France. And the only goal of this company, it was a privately owned company, was to raise capital in order to buy gold. And I think that the model that Michael Saylor has reinvented is a very old model, in fact, that has proven to be efficient until 1971, when for a time-limited moment, the US have suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And so what he's doing, what we are doing, what they are doing, those guys, they are simply making something which is in fact simply obvious.
That's fascinating. Yeah. All right, let's open it up for a few audience questions, if anybody has any for these lovely gentleman.
Thank you very much. Hi. Great to hear all the panelists. For the financial engineers, I guess this question out there, fast-growing treasury company, a startup, what do you say is the ideal sort of debt to equity type ratio as you're growing? Because it seems to be 100% equity in the beginning, which I understand. At what point in the cycle do you think that makes sense? Thank you.
That's a great question. I don't think there's a hard and fast answer. I think the key is that your debt's durable long term. You know, you can't. You have plenty of time to figure out how you're going to either refinance it or, you know, take it out. And so we actually, I think we're one of the more levered treasury companies. We're not that levered. We have a convertible. It's about 20% of our holdings. And I think that's about the right. Michael has talked about 20 to 30%. I kind of agree with that. It just seems like kind of a comfort zone. It's typical, you know, even with public companies in the public markets in general, I feel like that's kind of the right area to be in. I wouldn't want to go beyond that.
Hi. Thanks a lot for the wonderful panel. My question is more related to I've been working in trading, investment banking for most of my careers. And I think the biggest holy grail I realized is to scale a product, and I think treasury companies like you guys are building a great in Bitcoin space to get access to the rating agencies, Kroll, S&P, Moody's, and so on. I know these guys have been usually a bit slow, especially with the subprime debacle, but I think if you really crack that part, suddenly you have, especially in the United States, where insurance companies, pension funds are pretty much highly regulated, like, oh, we can buy anything which has a rating. We don't really care what's in the underlying, but that's the ultimate arbitrage, I think. So where do you guys stand there in the process, and what's your view?
You know, we're being typical followers in that category. I think Michael Saylor is doing unbelievable work in that area, and I think he's going to succeed, and that will lay the groundwork for the rest of us. So we're just, I think he's super focused on that. I think another area is just, when are we going to get to a point where we can just borrow money from J.P. Morgan, and Bank of America, and just have these types of loans. I think it kind of fits into the same category. And then Katie bar the door. I think it's going to be an incredibly huge opportunity for us to raise capital in much more traditional ways that are going to be less, onerous.
Bob Bosalek from 319 Capital. Question to Yves and potentially Am as well. You talked about the relationship between the absolute size of the company, so think MicroStrategy, and some of the smaller companies, H100, ABG, etc. How do you think about this relationship in terms of absolute size currently, either when they already have some Bitcoin on the balance sheet or not, and the future potential of the business? In other way, at what point do you rebalance from MicroStrategy to the smaller companies? Thank you.
That's a difficult question, huh? I would say that the advantage of MicroStrategy, the secret of all of that, in a few months, I think, will be the execution. I have met with a few companies, and I can tell you that there is a lot of contrast in the teams that are trying to execute that. What we know for sure with MicroStrategy, it is that they master all the steps of the process. You're right, and as I mentioned, one of the items of the secret sauce is the ability to raise capital in proportion to your market cap. And when your market cap is huge, it's more difficult. But I believe that Michael Saylor is proving to us every week, every Monday, and that he is accumulating capital in a very, very forecastable way. And for the younger company, it's a bet. It's a speculation. Some of them have been able to do a great job, but the future will tell us, in fact, how much sustainable they have been able in the rhythm of accumulating capital.
Yeah, I mean, I think Yves' point is it's the core, which is that you've got to, if, let's say, if the blockchain group can double their Bitcoin capital in a certain number of months, and then you could say, well, could MicroStrategy do the same thing? And it starts to get hard to contemplate when you're talking about, 1 million Bitcoin or something, right? And how many more times can they do it? There is only so much Bitcoin, and then something will happen, which is the demand from the Treasury companies will start to have a massive impact on the Bitcoin price, and it will move out of range so that it becomes hard to, when the Bitcoin is more expensive, I guess it's harder to have a high yield in Bitcoin terms, right? Well, we'll see, but that's one thought on the topic. Yeah, and I think the other thing is you can see the range of MNAVs that companies hold. So I think it's partly about the shareholder perception and confidence and so on, belief in the execution of the team. You can see with Metaplanet that they have had an MNAV between 5 and 10 times, and they are just doing ATMs, moving strike warrants actually, they don't have ATMs. And so even though the MNAV will fall dramatically, all the way down to 5, and they will become a bit subdued because they're depressed, the price is down, but they just keep accumulating Bitcoin, and after a few months, this happened in February, they had 1,700 Bitcoin. A couple of months later, they had 5,000 Bitcoin. Suddenly the market realized, wait a minute, the MNAV is now 2.5. They thought that's cheap versus 5. They start bidding it up, and then it gets momentum, and then today it's 7, right? So you can see that it's important for the companies to be able to get their mojo back and get back to the MNAV range which they want to operate in. So what drives that, I guess, is sort of the behavior of the investors in that country. And different countries have different investing environments. Like Japan has a very active retail trader. Apparently the Nordics do as well, the Swedish stock exchange. And it just depends, right? So it's hard to predict.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. So if you have more questions for them, make sure you catch them afterwards. And thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your insights today.